Hey, and welcome back to PN Wreckage, home of the husband-wife haircut standoff and the first modification on this truck. So I want to talk with you guys a little bit more about it, and I hope you enjoy. So today is Tuesday, June 15th, 13th, not 15th. I'm really good at dates in case you hadn't figured that out. And I got my first modification to this truck installed on Saturday, last Saturday, so it's been a few days. And I didn't want to just rush to get a video out, even though it's been a little while since I posted one, because I wanted to be able to give you guys a pretty thorough review of really what it's like to live with this and how things have been going, and not just my initial impressions. So I went with, as you could probably tell from the title, the Bilstein 5162 leveling kit for this truck. That kit consists of the 2.3-inch Bilstein, or Bilstein, it is Bilstein, I'll say Bilstein. The 2.3-inch Bilstein leveling springs, or leveling coil, so it's not a spacer. They come with a new isolator for the top of the springs, and Bilstein 5160 shocks, which have the dual reservoir, and I think look really pretty sweet. So here's how this whole thing went down. I planned on doing this in my driveway because, you know, the internet is great, and I've seen a lot of people who have done it in their driveway, and I'm not going to do an install portion of this video. I think there's some people out there who've done a pretty nice job with showing really what it takes to install a leveling kit, and I don't want to bore you guys with that, but here's my experience with the kit and sort of what it was like installing it, and just some, I guess, tips for you for if you're actually going to be doing this or a similar kit yourself, because I think there are some things that, like, I thought I was pretty prepared going in, and I wasn't, or I wasn't as prepared as I should have been. And also read the instructions. Don't tell anyone I said that, but probably read them, because there is some important information. And here's what that is. Number one, this actually is probably one of, if not the only modification that is easier to do on the ground and not on a lift. And that was something that it just didn't really occur to me that could possibly be how this whole thing would come together, because like literally everything is easier on a lift. This one is not. So I got a call from my wife's cousin, and he's my buddy, so my buddy Kyle. Kyle is actually the guy who rescued me from the blizzard after I crashed my 2016, so he wanted to be featured on this video. Unfortunately, our schedules didn't work out for him to be able to talk about this kit as well, but I can offer some of his opinions for him. So I got a call from Kyle asking if I wanted to accompany him to a place where I could use a lift, and I said absolutely. So I went there. I'm not supposed to say where it was, but you can enjoy the time-lapse video of us doing this whole thing. We ended up getting the truck, or having to put the truck on and off the lift, including taking the tires on and off because we stopped paying attention, a total of 3 times. The first time is because the chassis hoist that we were on lifts at the axles, and you need to be able to lower your axle down to be able to get the springs in. So after kind of having that like, oh shit moment, we finally realized, okay, this isn't going to be able to work. Backed it off that lift, put it on a traditional 4-point lift, or a 2-tower 4-point lift, and tried it again. Realized after taking the tires off again that we put the lift points, the front lift points at least, on the back of the radius arms. And I'll include pictures of like what all these things are, because not everyone knows what suspension components are called, and I am one of those people. It's always nice when those are there. So these are the radius arms, and we realized that, again, just like with the axle, those would need to be manipulated to get the springs in, so that wasn't going to be able to work either. We finally used a lift point, or a jack point, directly behind the radius arms, and that made me super nervous because way more of the front end of the truck and that giant iron block of Cummins was sticking out the front of the lift than I was personally comfortable with. But we ensured it was stable. It didn't look great, but it ended up being just fine, and we got this whole thing done. As we lowered the axle on the lift, there's 2 things that they don't mention in the instructions, and some people have kind of touched on these during their install videos. One is that the vent tube for your front differential, there's a bracket, like a zip tie, that holds that sort of to the frame, that needs to be undone to give you some additional clearance, and this may change depending on if you go a 2-inch coil or a 2.5-inch coil, but these are 2.3, so they're kind of right in the middle. So we lowered it down, made sure the vent system or the vent tube cleared, and then also the ABS lines. There's a bracket that has just one bolt that holds it onto a portion of the brake components, and that needed to be removed as well. All of a sudden we were realizing there was tension accumulating on the brake lines, and that's definitely not a place you want to have tension. Once those two things were undone, it was very easy to manipulate this whole portion of it. Getting the radius or the track bar back in place was a little bit of a struggle, but once you get that unbolted, get your sway bar end links unbolted, and all of the lines, like the brake lines and the vent tube, cleared, you can lower that down pretty well, and you use a transmission jack to do that. The install took a lot longer than anticipated, and part of that is because we had to put it back on the lift 3 times. The other part is just trying to keep things, like trying to make sure things are being done the right way, and things did go in the right way, so that's great. We didn't have to disassemble anything. I'm not a mechanic by trade, and he plays one sometimes, but none of us had ever done anything like this before. So just make sure when you're doing yours, unbolt the ABS brackets. It'll save you a headache, and down the road or down the line while you're installing, and that's about it. The other part of it is, although it shows this on an alignment rack, unfortunately, you'll see that at the end of the time lapse. Unfortunately, that did not work out super well because one of the guys who works at that particular establishment had taken really the tools home that needed to be used for us to make adjustments to toe and to caster. I noticed that toe was pretty significantly out. I think it was 0.7 degrees out of whack, which doesn't sound like a ton, but it definitely contributed to sort of scrubbing on the exterior of both tires. So it was negative toe on both sides, and that appears to be something that was a pre-existing issue. I haven't had any kind of, I'm coming up on 10,000 miles. I'm at 9,859.2 on this right now, but I haven't like bashed it into anything. I haven't really like raced it off road, so I'm not sure exactly what contributed to the toe problem, but that was there. So I drove it for a day, drove it to work and back, total about 60 miles. It drove pretty well. I didn't really notice a difference in it, but just something to note. And if you're experiencing odd tire wear, you might want to have your truck aligned, and it's unfortunate that that's a problem, but apparently it can be. So got these on and drove around, and here are my thoughts. I am absolutely in love with this lift kit. The ride is, I use the word significantly a lot, I use the word substantially a lot, and I don't know that either of those really tell the whole story, and that is that the ride is just leaps and bounds better than it was. And remember, this truck came with the 4x4 off-road package, which means that it came with Bilstein or Bilstein 4600 series shocks on the truck from the factory. And I'm a big fan of those. For anybody who's seen videos where I reference that, I really like those shocks. I think they're vastly superior to just the Chrysler shocks that come on these trucks without that package. And it wasn't that I had a problem with that led me to wanting to replace them. It's that those shocks can only be used with factory ride height. They cannot be used with 2+ inch lift or a lift at all. So I did some research. I looked at the 5100s just because the price was pretty solid on those, and that's a monotube shock. It is the step up from the 4600s and the step below the 5160s. And the reviews I read, people were saying that it was a relatively stiff shock, and that is not what I wanted, especially after getting used to the 4600s over the last 3 months and 10,000 miles, because I really like the way those rode. And so ideally I'd like something even, not necessarily softer, but just like a better ride. So I didn't want to go 5100s. I took a look at shocks from different companies other than Bilstein, and I've always had really good experience with Bilstein. I've used them on a variety of vehicles. I really like the 4600s on my truck, and I think that company does a really nice job. But I looked at the Fox shocks that have the reservoir. I looked at the Rancho 9000s, like the adjustable ones. I looked at a variety of shocks, and I ran across a deal I really couldn't pass up for this leveling kit and the shocks that went along with it. So I paid shipped to my house, which it took about only 2 days to ship it. I got it from BilsteinLifts.com, I believe is the website. Because Bilstein does not sell anything directly to consumers, you have to go through a retailer. So I bought these from BilsteinLifts.com after finding a cheaper price on another website, but that was out of stock. Contacted Bilstein Lifts and said, hey, you guys want 800 bucks, like $799.99 for this. The other website wants $579.99 shipped, and I'd rather go through you because I wouldn't have to wait. They responded within about 5 minutes and said, hey, go ahead, here's a code to pay that price. So I did, pulled the trigger on that. $580 essentially shipped, and that included 3 Bilstein stickers, so about 3 more than I needed, but also the 5160 shocks for the front, the 2.3-inch Bilstein springs for the level, and then new isolators that replace the factory rubber ones that sit on top of the factory coils. Whether or not you need a dual reservoir is really up for debate, and I went with this largely because I think it looks really cool. The other part of it is people who reviewed these shocks stated that they were softer than the 5100s, and that is what I was going for. So they accommodated the additional space I needed for the lift. Additionally, they were supposed to be softer, and they definitely are. And I know that's a combination of the leveling springs as well as the shocks, but I've been tremendously impressed. Anything from 80 mile per hour freeway, cruising to going through my hometown, which apparently they have run out of money to make repairs to the road following the hellish winter we had. So the roads are not great. I've been intentionally running into like some of those potholes and some of the really rough pavement areas just to see how things go, and it's a lot less jarring than it was even with the 4600s, and certainly significantly much smoother, or significantly smoother than it was with the Chrysler shocks on my old truck. I've also gone up into sort of the wilderness area outside of where I live and driven on anything from really bad gravel roads to really good gravel roads to just terrible pavement out there. I've tried to hit it at a variety of speeds, and I have not noticed anything concerning about these shocks. Their ability to recover over miles and miles and miles of washboard has really impressed me. The only thing I really don't like about these shocks, and it's a problem, is that they have really demonstrated, really shed a lot of light on how superior they are to the 4600s. Now, Bilstein does not make a matching kit or matching part for the rear axle on this truck in the 5160s at this point, and that's been coming soon for years from what I can tell from forum posts. So I'm sort of in this position of wanting to not mix brands, and that's just really me being sort of OCD about it. The front ride's way better than the back. I go over a bump and it's like thump bump when it hits the rear, and part of that may be due to the additional PSI in the rear tires, but I did also experience that after I swapped my rear tires to the front and basically rotated my tires, and I did that because they forgot to do it when they changed my oil, but also I wanted a little bit more of the tread on the rear, because 800 foot-pounds of torque definitely twists off some of your tread just when you're driving it spiritedly. And there's also some debate about using the exhaust brake as well, and whether or not that eats your tires. But so I rotated the tires. The rears had a lower PSI. Those ended up because they were from the front, and the fronts had a little bit higher. Fronts were about 74, and rears were about 70. And I still noticed that it much harsher impact than when bumps hit the rear axle than when I went over them with the front axle. There is really nothing. There's nothing about these shocks that I don't like as much as the 4600s. There's not a single thing. I think they look way better. They're The mounting was a little scary just because I had to drill into the frame, but that's kind of a necessary evil for some of the shock systems out there. And so mounting that additional reservoir in a place that was safe and free from just, you know, rocks being thrown out by the tires or whatever obstacles on the road there were, having those mounted in a safe place, and I'll show you, and obviously you'll see where those are, required drilling into the frame and sort of eyeballed it from side to side, and that ended up not being too terrible. So I guess the problem is that I now just really need to get new shocks for the rear. Okay, so because of my professional level editing, you won't even have noticed this transition, but I'll call it out anyway just so you can see a little bit behind the curtain. Upon further review, there are a couple things that I neglected to mention, and I'm pretty sure you want a full picture video rather than a seamless video. So here it is. There is one other thing I don't like about these shocks, and I think that's a legitimate issue, that it showcases how much better they are than my 4600s. But the real issue is that with any shock, and just it's more pronounced with dual reservoir or multi-reservoir shocks, you have this sort of warm-up period. So when you first get driving down your road or street or whatever the case is, your car or truck will ride a little bit rougher than it's going to once it's warmed up. And these are no exception. They're actually more pronounced than the 4600s were, and they're also significantly more pronounced than the other shocks that I've run in different types of vehicles. So it takes a lot longer for the fluid or gas to warm up within the dual reservoir shocks. Once it does, it's a vastly superior shock in every subjective measurement I can think of, because obviously I don't have this hooked up to any kind of computerized software. This is just my opinion once again. So my opinion, the only other thing I don't like is just that it's a little rougher in the morning, and just trying to give you a full picture once again. So all in all, it's definitely not a complaint. I still give these an absolute 10. It's just something to keep in mind, or if you first install them and you're like, what the heck's going on? It's because you probably haven't warmed them up yet. All right, that's all about what's wrong with it. There are a couple of other things that I just want to mention because they're not mentioned in this video. Number one is the reason I didn't go with spacers. I did not get a spacer kit, despite the fact that they were approximately 1/5 of the price, and that is because with a spacer, you know, it gets the job done, and if that money is holding you back from lifting your truck and getting it to look the way that you want it to, then by all means, you know, disregard this advice and get a spacer kit, because I think, you know, the downsides are relatively minimal and the upside is this sweet looking truck, as long as you get a quality kit. You lose out on about, you know, 2.5 inches of suspension travel, and look at any of the really high performance Baja vehicles or off-road vehicles, like anything that is designed to, or is purpose-built for rough terrain, and you'll see that they have long suspension travel. I'm not saying that I'm going to be jumping this truck anytime soon, but I think it is important to remember that little pieces matter. And so if that matters to you, if you're going for a softer ride, and if you're looking to maximize your truck's potential, I would really encourage you to look at an actual coil replacement rather than just a spacer. But not hating on spacers, just that's not the mod for me, and I think it would be for some people and definitely wouldn't be for others. The final thing, final part of this interjection is I did not include a measuring taped after picture, and the reason for that is because I swapped my tires front to rear. There was enough of a tread difference that it didn't make a ton of sense, because it actually looked, there's probably a 1/2 inch more tread on the tires that were on the front of this truck that are now in the rear. So the rear does sit higher in the pictures, but it also has a little bit, maybe 1/2 inch more of the wheel well filled up by the taller tire. So not only does it in some of the pictures look like it's sitting lower in the rear, it isn't, I assure you, but it threw off the after measurement. I did do a before measurement, and I'll include that here. The reason for that is because you know, I didn't realize I was going to be rotating my tires, and I did, and that threw off the measurement. So just trust me on this. It was almost exactly 2 1/4 inches taller in the front than it was prior to this, taking into account the additional height of the tire, and that was pretty easy to calculate just based on doing a measurement of the rear wheel rear axle once the wheels were on it, or once the tires have been rotated. So the tires from the rear went in the front, makes it look like the lift was bigger than it was. The ones in the rear make it look like it's sitting kind of weird. So there is that. My apologies on that. Still getting this whole thing down, but I assure you, the Bilstein springs, the 2.3-inch Bilstein springs, almost right exactly at 2¼ inches. So essentially as advertised. Now back to your regularly scheduled programming. Sorry about that. There, it says no parking under bridge, but it doesn't say no parking between the bridges. Alright, so, you know, not like no joking intended, and it is kind of funny, but the only downside I see to this is that it's very apparent to me that I need to replace the rear shocks now. They just don't match up quite as well, and it has really illustrated how much of an improvement in your ride quality you can achieve by simply upgrading your shocks. And again, I know this is the Bilstein leveling kit, and so I have coils on as well, but it overall, I'm a huge fan. I give it like a 10 out of 10 on ride quality. It's very sure-footed in an off-road setting, even on a washboard, and even with an empty bed. The rear is definitely a bit more unsettled than the front is, but I think a lot of that has to do with the shocks and also just the lack of weight in the rear. The stance on this truck, when I first pulled it off the lift, once it was all done, the stance looked just a hair higher in the front than it did in the rear. It pretty quickly settled down. I think it imprinted into those pretty heavy-duty foam isolators that are sandwiched between the top of the coil and then sort of your shock tower, or your coil tower built into your suspension. And it now sits absolutely perfect. The stance is exactly as I wanted it. It still has a very slight rake to the rear, and that's important for a couple reasons. The first is that there's an optical illusion where if the front and back of the truck are perfectly level, like if you put a level on it and saw the bubbles right in the middle, if they were perfectly level, your brain thinks that it's sitting higher in the front. And since that's not the look I'm going for, and not a fan of that look at all, that's important. The other part of it is, if you load up any weight in the truck, you want it to sit level rather than, level it out rather than suddenly getting the bro stance, or I'm not sure what they call it, but the kind of pre-runner look that is not a good look for heavy-duty trucks, in my opinion. The stance looks great. The coils are outstanding. There's definitely a little more body roll in the turns than there was before, and I know that's kind of a natural consequence of leveling your truck, but it's really not bad. It's not anything that has taken away from the excellent handling of these trucks. I definitely sit up higher. I had to change my seating position as well. The rear of my seat back, had to be pushed forward a couple of inches to compensate for that rotating basically back in the rear axle. And I see a lot more of my hood than I did. The heavy-duty hood has the little vent-looking things on the side, the 3 indentations on either side of the power bulge in the middle, and I can see 2 of those at least. I'm not super tall, but I can see 2 of those just driving down the road. It didn't impact, or at least doesn't feel like it made the truck more difficult to maneuver or park. Visibility was certainly negatively impacted, albeit slightly, but that trade-off is really the only one, and I think not something anybody's really going to care about. The other part of it is the bed is a lot more visible than it was, because you're pushing up on the front axle, which sort of rotates the rear axle a little bit, or rotates the bed on the rear axle just a hair, and you don't get this sort of tail in the air look anymore, obviously, because that's the point of leveling. But also, I find it easier to get into the bed. It's easier to grab stuff out of the bed, and overall, it looks better from every angle, from the front, from the sides, and from the back. I have not noticed a reduction in fuel economy as a result of this. I haven't done any kind of extensive testing, but just the fill-up I just had was pretty much in line with what it's been getting, and so I don't see that as being an issue. And now that it's aligned, it drives spectacularly. Oh, I am really happy that this is the first one that I went with. I was between this and an intake, really, and that I think there are some things that have been brought up about just various other mods you can do. I want to look at the CCV delete, or like an option for a CCV delete, because I don't like having that feed grimy oil into the turbo. And that's something that can happen, you know, I guess really any time, because that's 40 or 50 bucks for one of those kits, or I can just kind of do it at home or do it myself. So this, again, one of the only modifications that is probably easier to do when you are not on a lift, which never even occurred to me going in that there may be some of those, but it definitely is. I would recommend having probably 2 heavy-duty jacks on hand when you need to be able to lift it up, because it's kind of awkward separating essentially the suspension from the cab completely. But I pulled my 4600s off, pulled my springs off. I have those in a box, and I'll likely end up selling those. Maybe somebody will get a lift out of it, who knows. But I'll probably wait until I pull the rears off so that I can have a full set of 4600s to sell. In case you're curious, as I looked for feedback, a lot of people recommended the Thuren kit, Thuren, and that guy's out of Oregon. His products look great. I have absolutely no complaints about them. The price was certainly higher than what I paid, and I saw a presence on YouTube for people who had reviewed that kit and discussed it and taken pictures of it and those things. And I think that what I'd like to do is sort of find this compromise between providing information about parts and upgrades that maybe aren't available on YouTube at this point, or at least when this video is made, for you guys to be able to make decisions on yours, and then also find maybe alternatives to, or like find another one of the best parts rather than just the big ones that are super known. So I looked at Carly kits, I looked at Thuren kits, and I also looked at the Kelderman air suspension. And I did not go with the full air suspension, and I do not intend on going with the full air suspension for a couple of reasons. The price was very significant. Kelderman was nice enough to agree to work with me on the price a little bit in exchange for making some videos about it. It still put it into a place like right in the middle of the $4,000 range, like 4,500 bucks, for me to have the full onboard air compressor, the front airbags and the rear airbags. And that is not, we're looking to sell our house and upgrade it, like trying to get a piece of property, and I just couldn't justify it at this time. And so the price is a big part of it. The other part of it is airbags are a wear item, and the airbags do eventually go out. They're a little bit of a vulnerability on the truck, and while there are a lot of people out there running around with those, unfortunately, if I were to be out in the middle of somewhere, if I lose an airbag, kind of screwed in terms of just dragging that wheel well on the tire the whole way home, and hopefully being able to get out of wherever I find myself. So just in terms of rock solid reliability, I've had a great experience with Bilstein. I think they put out an excellent product, and I think that coils are more reliable than a full airbag setup, particularly on a heavy duty truck, and particularly on a truck that is going to be used to go off-road pretty regularly. I didn't go with Carly or Thuren. Not really for any particular reason other than price. I think they put out a really nice product, but I didn't want to just do something else that everyone else had done. So this Bilstein kit, I haven't seen a YouTube video about it. Could have missed it, but I don't think I did. Don't think there is one, so there will be now. And overall, I absolutely give it a 10. So shop around for prices. They are kind of all over the board, and I ended up getting 220 bucks off because I just asked if they would. If you guys have questions, please leave them in the comments section. Send me an email at pnwreckage@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Instagram. pnwreckage is my username. I appreciate you watching again, and I'll keep you posted on the next one. Thanks for watching.